Hello everyone, this is Keith from the Solo Gamers Club and welcome to the channel. Tonight we'll be playing our fourth episode of Fire in the Sky, the Great Pacific War 1941 to 1945. In the previous video you probably saw towards the end of that video I made a big blunder, so we're going to correct that right now, and that has to do with the British forces in Rangoon. I've reset the British forces in Southeast Asia back to how they were prior to them taking their first deployments and their operational moves. I blundered in the last video. I attempted to send replacements into Rangoon, and you cannot send a replacement point into an enemy occupied hex. The only way you can enter an enemy occupied hex in the deployment phase is using one hex movement. So that wasn't allowed, and neither were the aircraft allowed to be sent to Rangoon. We have to do that as a part of the operations phase. The problem with that is you have to have sea control in order to land the forces. So the British can't do that either because all they have is the Hermes. It's an aircraft carrier, and by the rules as written, you're not allowed to have an aircraft carrier into the bombardment box. And I posted a question on BGG about this, and I really didn't get any response that would clarify this. The rules as written clearly state that carriers and light carriers have to be placed in the carrier task forces box. But like in this case, the Hermes actually has a gunnery value. It has 0, like a destroyer would. And considering the rules that we have for the Japanese battleship carrier Issei, and that's a optional rule that allows the Japanese to construct the first battleship carrier that they actually did construct. And that's allowed to pick whether it wants to be in the bombardment box or the carrier box. So I was just wondering, my question is if carriers aren't allowed into the bombardment box, then why do they have a 0 firepower? They should have a dash there or something. And considering the rules for the Issei, where it can select whether it is in the bombardment box or the carrier box, I didn't see a reason why we couldn't do that, but the rules as written state you can't. So my plan would have been to use the Hermes into the bombardment box, even though it's a carrier, and then use that to get sea control and then land the replacements, but the rules as written don't allow that. So that was the problem. So anyway, I've reset everything to the way it was prior to the British taking their turn. And I think the only thing that they're going to do is they're going to use sea movement during the deployment phase, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're going to redeploy this 2 points of land-based aircraft into Calcutta. That would use up 2 of their 12 transport points, leaving them with 10. And they really can't do anything else. There's no way for us with the rules as written to give replacements into the 17th Division, not unless you're allowed to use the Hermes as in the bombardment task force. Now, I did a little research. That Hermes actually had 6 5.5-inch guns on it, so it definitely could operate as a destroyer, but not per the rules as written. So that's going to take care of the correction that we had at the end of the last video, and I apologize for the confusion that there was with that. Now the next piece of housekeeping that we'll take care of is I've made a decision with the game. Now I've set this up to play Scenario 2, which stretches from 1941 to 1945. I still have 13 different turns I'd have to play through. That would be, and at the rate I'm going, it would be a minimum of 13 more videos. So I think what I'm going to do is, I was a little, I guess, aggressive in trying to bring Scenario 2 to the channel. It would just be too long. We'll have a total of 16 videos on this. So what we'll do is, Scenario 2 and Scenario 3, Pearl Harbor to Midway, are identical in how they start out. So what we'll do is we're going to play through turn 3, and then we'll use the Scenario 3 scoring to determine whether we have a Japanese win, an Allied win, or a tie. So this will be the final video in this series. And I think what I'll do in the future is I'll probably play scenarios rather than attempting the whole campaign game. It would be just too long to bring to the channel. And what I could do is play the campaign game and then just film that in a different way, giving updates for the 16 turns. I guess that would be another option as well. But we're going to end this series after the conclusion of this turn 3, and we'll score it according to the Midway, Pearl Harbor to Midway scenario rules. All right, so we're going to begin Japan's turn 3, and we'll start out with the economic phase. We've reserved 8 transport points, and I'm going to use those to bump up our oil up by 8. So that'll move our oil reserves from 22 up to 30. Next up would be our reinforcement phase, and unfortunately Japan has no reinforcements during turn 3. So all they'll be able to do is reset their sub and transport points. Sub points will be back up to 2, and the transport marker will be matching the merchant ship counter, which is 60. And speaking of sub points, I made another blunder. I can't fix that. I should have committed my 2 sub points to attacking the 2 task forces that the U.S. put up in Guadalcanal. We could have maybe taken out a carrier or something, but I forgot to do it, so we'll just leave it as it is, but I'll try to remember that in the future. And next up is going to be our first deployments. And since now we're going to be vying for the scenario 3 victory conditions, that centers on the Japanese victory point value being at above 35, I believe. And yes, to achieve a Japanese victory, we have to have greater than 35 victory points. And otherwise, it would be if it's less than 35, it's a Allied victory. Otherwise, it's a draw. Now, there are other victory points that are going to be tallied into this, and that includes Allied carriers plus 1 victory point sunk, or half a point for if they're damaged. Japanese elite carrier would be -2 victory points if sunk, or -1 if damaged. All other Japanese carriers are -1 if sunk, or half a point if damaged. And Japanese light carriers are a -half a point if those are sunk. So that will be our victory conditions then for the rest of this game. Now, Japan has a damaged 43rd Division on Guadalcanal, so we're going to have to attempt to move replacements down to that division to stabilize that area in Guadalcanal. So we're going to take a 2-point replacement marker, and we're going to place that in Kure. And that is a part of technically the reinforcement phase, and we'll attempt to get that moved down into the South Pacific, and then that has to be transferred via the operational phase as a task force, because that is an enemy occupied location. Okay, our first step for the first deployment is going to be to get that replacement unit in position where it can reinforce Guadalcanal. So we're going to get a 2-point replacement and 2 destroyers, and we're going to move those 3 hexes to the Marianas. It'll cost us a total of 4 points. Our next action is to get a destroyer force from Formosa, and we'll move that 3 hexes to Brunei, and we're going to use that to escort the Kawaguchi Brigade and invade Leyte. In New Guinea, the 2nd Division is ordered to cross the Owen Stanley Ridge and launch an attack on Port Moresby overland. That'll cost no points because that is a 1-hex move. And incidentally, that destroyer transfer we did to Brunei will cost us 1 point. We're down to 55 transport. Then we're going to send the Akagi and Kaga and a destroyer from Kure to Truk. That'll cost us a total of 5 points. It'll move 4 movement hexes to Truk, and that'll reduce us down to 50 transport. And then to help protect our forward bases in the Gilberts and Wake, we're going to transfer some land-based aircraft from Formosa. And they're going to move 1, 2, 3 to the Marianas, and then 1, 2, 3 to wake. That'll cost us a total of 4 points. And I'll move us down to 46, and we'll do the same to reinforce the Gilberts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 into the Gilberts. That'll cost us another 4. That'll move us down to 42. Then we're going to transfer 2 land-based aircraft from Kure to Palau. That'll cost 2, and then another 2 points to send it into Leh, which has an air capacity of 2. That'll cost a total of 4 points. That will move us down to 38 transport. Then we're going to transfer the 38th Division, a cruiser, and a destroyer from Kure. And that's going to move 4 hexes, 1, 2, 3, 4, into Hainan. That's going to eventually form our Surabaya invasion force. It's going to cost us a total of 4, 5, 6, 7 transport points. That'll leave us with 31. And then we're going to create a northern force with Admiral Hosagaya, and that's going to consist of the 6th Division, a cruiser, and a destroyer. And we're going to move that force 3 hexes to Paramashiro, and that's going to form our Aleutian strike group. And that's going to cost us a total of 7 transport. That leaves us with 24 transport. Then we're going to move a destroyer from Palau to Rabaul. 1, 2, and 3 into Rabaul. That'll cost us 1 transport point, leaving us 23 remaining. And I'm going to make one change, and that's that group from Yokosuka to Paramashiro. We're going to leave the cruiser behind, and we'll just go with the destroyer and the 6th Division. So that will save us 2 points, and that'll move us back up to from 23 up to 25. And that'll be it for our first deployments. And I have one other movement, and that's going to be to move a destroyer from Okinawa 4 spaces to Saigon. And now we're going to do our operations, our operational moves, and we'll begin by forming our task forces. In the Marianas, we're going to form a force consisting of 2 destroyers and the replacement unit in the Marianas. It's going to cost us a total of 2 oil and 4 transport points. And we're going to move that 4 hexes south to Guadalcanal. And that'll be our attempt at resupplying the damaged 43rd Division. And we're going to be using the Tokyo Express counter on that movement. And we're going to form a task force in Rabaul consisting of the Ichiki Brigade and a destroyer. It's going to cost us a total of 4 transport and 1 oil, and that's going to move 2 hexes into Hollandia, where it's going to make an amphib operation against that neutral space. So that cost us a total of 4 transport and 1 oil. That leaves us with 17 transport and 27 oil. Then we're going to form an invasion force in Brunei consisting of a destroyer and the Kawaguchi Brigade. That's going to move 2 hexes into Leyte. It'll cost us a total of 4 transport and 1 oil. That'll give us 13 transport and 26 oil. And finally, we're going to form a carrier group in Truk, and that is going to be a carrier support group for Guadalcanal. It's going to consist of the Hiru and Saru and a destroyer, and that's going to cost us 4 oil, and that's going to move to Guadalcanal. And I almost forgot, we're also going to be launching an attack against Surabaya. So we're going to activate the 38th Division along with a cruiser, destroyer, and battleship. And that's going to cost us a total of 7 oil and 8 transport. That's going to move 1, 2, 3, 4 into Surabaya. And we're going to create a task force in Saigon of the destroyer that'll use up 1 oil point. And he's going to move 4 spaces, 3 spaces to Rangoon, and that will be enough to wrest sea control of that area. That moves our oil down to 14 and transport down to 5. And now we'll move on to the reaction phase. And obviously in Holland, the Dutch in Surabaya are going to activate. That'll be the De Ruyter and the destroyer squadron, and they're going to activate in their own space there and attempt to intercept that invasion force that's coming for them. The only other reaction force that we have available to us would be the Hermes in Bombay and the Perth in Brisbane. Well, there's not much the Perth can do. It can't reach Hollandia because we have the air umbrella over those areas. It could react into Guadalcanal, but that would be a suicide mission. So the only option we have is the Hermes, and whether that would move and try to help out the beleaguered 17th Division in Rangoon. It would be unescorted, so it's open to submarine attack, and its anti-aircraft defense is not too good. So I don't know if they would do that. I guess we can make a roll on the unlikely category and see what happens. We'll try that. And here's the roll. The result is a 4, and that's no. So the Hermes will remain in port. I would not have authorized that if I was the Allied player either. Okay, so that is the reaction phase, and now we're going to move on to the Japanese air commitments. And I think what we'll do is we're going to have the 2 points from Leh are going to add air cover to the ground attack in Port Moresby. 2 points are going to be from Rabaul, will be aiding into that. And the other 2 points will aid in the Guadalcanal operation over there. So that's what we've got there, including the Hiru. And that can be used in a ground support effort against the 1st Marines. In Singapore, we're going to commit 8 air points from Saigon, and that will assist Yamashita's 25th Army in its attack in Singapore. And we'll do the same in Bangkok and aid Aida's 15th Army with its attack in Rangoon. I've decided to make one change in the air commitments, and I'm going to move those air units that I was going to use to support Guadalcanal. We're going to move those to support the invasion in Port Moresby. I think that'll be better applied there. We're going to have some air points from our carrier force that we have at Guadalcanal, so that should be sufficient. All right, we're going to move now to the combat phase, and we'll begin by resolving these from west to east. So we'll start in the Southeast Asian theater. So we'll begin with Aida's attack on Rangoon, and we'll set that up on the battle board. So we'll calculate our air points. Japan has a total of 4 long-range aircraft, which will equate to 2 air points. British have none. So that means that Japan is going to have air supremacy. Japan is going to use their 2 air points, and they're going to use that in the ground attack support level. And we'll get some anti-aircraft from Rangoon, and that's going to be 2 points of anti-aircraft. And we'll see what British anti-aircraft can do. And they have 1 success, so that's going to knock out 1 point of Japanese aircraft. And Japan will use that in a ground attack capacity. Japan's ground attack aircraft will be eligible for a +1. They have air supremacy with an air point, so +1 to the roll. 4 becomes a 5, and that's going to inflict 1 point of damage on the 17th Division. Japan is going to use their destroyers to take sea control, and that's going to give them supply and deny supply to the British. Now we'll take care of our ground combat. The 15th Army will attack, looking for 5s and 6s. And Japan scored a total of 2 hits. So that'll give 3 hits against the 17th Division. And now it's their roll. Looks like Rangoon is going to be done. They're going to hit on 6s only. They have 1 hit, so 1 hit will be applied to the 15th Army. So we'll analyze this. 3 hits for 17th Division, only 1 hit on the 15th Army. The 17th Division is destroyed. And so General Aida's 15th Army has taken Rangoon. Next up is the 25th Army's attack on Singapore. All right, Japan has 8 points of long-range aircraft. That equates to 4 air points. And the British have none, so they're going to gain air supremacy. And Japan is going to use all 4 of their air points to attack the Malayan Army. Singapore has an anti-aircraft rating of 4. So we'll roll 4 dice for them. And they have 1 hit. So that'll knock out 1 point of air. And Japan is going to strike with 3 points. And they're going to gain a +1 because of the air supremacy. And here's the roll. They have no hits. Okay, so those aircraft will return to Saigon. And now, both sides, 25th Army will be supplied. The Singapore, the Malayan Army will not. They have no supply there. So, the 25th Army will roll 8 dice, and we're looking for 5s and 6s. And here's the roll. And they have a total of only 1 hit. That's not too good. We'll mark them with 1 hit. Is it possible that Percival could survive? We'll see. He's going to roll 4 dice, and he only hits on 6s. And he has no hits. So that is the end of the Malayan Army. They've lost 1-0. General Percival will go into prisoner of war camp. And Yamashita's 25th Army has taken Singapore. And now we're going to move on to our invasion of Surabaya, and we're going to have some surface combat, it looks like. Alright, so this is our surface action off the coast of Surabaya, and I think Japan is going to commit a tactical submarine to this. And I think the US is going to commit one of theirs. We'll begin with our anti-submarine warfare. And we'll roll for the Dutch first. And they have 1 destroyer unit. And that'll give them 1 die. And they're looking for a 5 or 6. There's no modifiers on this. And they rolled a 6. So they were able to sink that Japanese submarine before it could do any actions. And we'll move our subtotal down from 2 to 1. Now the Japanese will have the chance for anti-submarine warfare. They have 1 destroyer. Here's the roll. And they missed. So the Allied tactical submarine is going to move in for a strike. And we have to decide what we want to target here. And I think they'll try for the Congo. Now this is an Allied subpoint between turns 2 and 5, so it's going to be at a -1. So they're going to, in essence, have to roll a 6 to achieve a hit on the Congo. Here is the Allied sub-roll. They rolled a 3, and that is a miss, but they had at least a firing solution on that Japanese battleship. That'll move the US subpoints down 1. And now we're going to get to our battle segment, and we'll do our air-to-air combat. Neither side has any air, so what we do there is each side rolls a die, and the higher roll has air superiority. Here's the roll. And we tied. It's 2-2, so I'll have to see what happens with that. Well, if it's tied, we have to re-roll. Somebody has to have air superiority. I guess this would be represented by seaplanes, perhaps on board the ships, or some smaller air formations that aren't on the map. Japan wins 4-2, so they're going to have air superiority. And that allows them to pick their surface targets ahead of the Dutch. We'll form our combat groups starting with the team that does not have air superiority, so they're going to enter both of those into the sea control box. And now we have to respond. And I think what we're going to do is, we'll commit that battleship, I think, try to take out the Deruiter, and the cruiser will go on to go after the destroyers. And we have a destroyer left, and that won't serve any purpose for bombardment, so I guess we'll commit it, and we'll have that go and support the Myoko. Now the Japanese have long lance torpedoes, and that allows Japanese cruisers and destroyers to increase their firepower to 2 during the first round. So that'll be interesting. So how the surface action is going to be resolved is the firing ship's gunnery value or firepower is going to be cross-indexed with the target's armor. So in this case, the Kongo has a firepower of 2, and we're going to cross-index that with a defense rating of 8. We get a number, and that's 3. So the Kongo is going to hit the Deruiter on a roll of 3 or greater. And we'll make the roll. Result is a 6, and that is a hit on the Deruiter. Now we'll continue on with the Myoko. That's a heavy cruiser, and they're going to take advantage of the long lance torpedoes. So that means that their firepower is temporarily increased to 2 for the first round. So we're going to cross-index firepower 2 with defense of 8, and again we get a 3. So the Myoko will fire on the destroyers. Rolls a 1, and that's a miss. All right, then the destroyer will do the same. They're temporarily brought up to a 2. 2 against an 8 is 3, so the destroyers will hit on a 3 or greater. They rolled a 1, they missed. All right, now the opposing ships will do their fire, and we'll begin with the Deruiter, and that has a firepower of 1 against a defense of 10. That means the result is a 6. So the Dutch need a 6 to hit the Kongo. Here is their roll. They rolled a 4, and that's a miss. Now the Dutch destroyers will attack the Myoko, and that is a firepower of 0 cross-indexed with an armor of 9, and that needs a 6 as well. So here is their roll. Rolls a 4, and that is a miss. Now we're going to calculate our damage. The damage is calculated by rolling 2 dice, and we'll add in the following modifiers. The attacking firepower of the surface combat hit. So in the case of the Kongo, they get a +2 for the Kongo's gunnery fire. And we'll make the roll. So we're trying to equal or exceed the target's armor. +2. Rolls a 7, that's modified to a 9, and the Deruiter is sunk. And that was the only hit that we had in this first round. So now we're going to begin a second round. Now, the sides can attempt to disengage and withdraw. If a side withdraws, the other team would get shots at them as they exit the surface area. So the Dutch are just going to stick around. They will stay where they are, and all of the Japanese units are going to target that little Dutch destroyer. So we'll go to round 2, And we'll begin with the Congo. That has a firepower of 2 against a target armor of 8 is a 3 or greater. Here's the fire from the Congo. You have a 5 and that's a hit. We'll mark the Dutch destroyer with a hit. And now the Myoko will fire. And now we go back to their printed gunnery ratings. The Myoko has a 1 against an 8 is a 4. So they'll need to roll 4 or greater. And that's also a hit, so another hit on the destroyer. And finally the destroyer will fire. That has a firepower of 0 against a target armor of 8 is a 5 or greater. Here's the roll. And that also hits, so that Dutch destroyer was blasted to smithereens, it looks like. Now it's going to fire back at the Congo. We have a firepower of 1 against a armor rating of 10, which produces a 6. So the Dutch are going to need a 6 in order to hit the Congo. Here's the roll. They rolled a 3, that's a miss. So we've got 3 points of damage that we have to accrue for the Dutch destroyer. Japanese are going to roll 2 dice. The Congo will give them a +2 for its firepower, and then +1 for each hit over 1. So as these are resolved, I play it where the first hit has no extra value. The second hit would gain +1. The third hit would gain an additional +1. So here is the Congo's roll. +2, and they need to get an 8 or greater. Roll is a 9, that's modified to an 11, and the Dutch destroyers are at the bottom of the ocean. So Japan has sea control. The 38th Division will land in Surabaya, and we're going to conduct a ground combat there. Japanese will have supply, the Dutch will not. Japanese have no remaining units in the bombardment task force, so there'll be no additional fire on the Dutch units. So we'll launch the attack with the Japanese. They're going to roll 4 dice, and they'll hit on a result of 5 or 6. And they ended up with 1 hit. We'll mark the Dutch division with a hit. Now the Dutch will fire, and unfortunately they only can hit on 6s as they are unsupplied. So here is the Dutch roll. And they ended up with 1 hit. So each side took a total of 1 point of damage. And I'll have to see how that resolves itself. And it's pretty clear. It says if the non-phasing players' combat hits are equal to or greater than the phasing players, no loss occurs. So in this case, the Dutch division survives unscathed, which was not good. And so we're going to replace those forces back on the map. And so the feisty Dutch forces are putting up some valid defense against the 38th Division in Surabaya. All right, we'll move on to our landings in Leyte. Leyte is going to be an unopposed landing, so the Japanese destroyers will take sea control, and the Kawaguchi Brigade will land and occupy Leyte. Similar situation in Hollandia. Japanese destroyers take sea control, and the Achiki Brigade lands and takes Hollandia. And now we're going to resolve the combat in Port Moresby. We'll lay that out on the battle board. And we'll begin by taking care of our battle board preparation and the air combat phase. The Australian and New Zealand forces have 1 air point, so the Allies will have 1 air point. Japanese have a total of 6 long-range aircraft, giving them 3 air points. So we're going to conduct air-to-air combat. Japanese are going to roll 3 dice, and the British are going to roll, or I should say the New Zealand and Australian forces will roll 1 die. And there will be no modifiers on this roll. So we'll be looking for 5s and 6s. Here's the roll. And the Japanese have 1 hit. The New Zealand and Australian air forces have no hits. So that's going to decrease the Allies down to 0 air points. Japan has 3 air points that they can use for ground attack. And they can apply those to wherever they wish. And in this case, it's going to be attacking the ground forces and the air base. So I think what we'll do, I'm more inclined to try to get rid of that air point. So I think we'll place 2 of these ground attack aircraft against the air base, and we'll send 1 in a ground support role. All right, so now the New Zealand and Australian forces will use their anti-aircraft. Port Moresby has a rating of 2. I'll be rolling 2 dice. And they scored 1 hit. So 1 point is going to be removed from the Japanese strike forces. And now we can apply where we want them to. I should have waited for that until we did the AA fire. And I think we're going to apply both to trying to get rid of that air unit, because that is going to add an automatic, any surviving air units of the defenders are going to add a point of damage to the attacking land force. So we want to try to get rid of that. So the Japanese will be attacking with 2 air points in a strike capacity. By the way, we do have air supremacy because there were no Allied air points. So airstrike. Player has air supremacy. Target is in, I guess that's it. Yeah, it's just the air supremacy will give them +1. So each of these rolls for the Japanese will be at +1. Here is the roll. And they have no hits. Not good. All right. So now we're going to take care of our ground combat. That was disappointing. So the Japanese 2nd Division is going to have supply, and Port Moresby is also going to be supplied because the Japanese did not bother to take sea control. So each side is going to roll 4 dice, and 1 point of damage will automatically be issued to the 2nd Division for the surviving air point. So we'll mark that right now. That's why it's important to get rid of that land-based aircraft if you can. So each side will roll 4 dice, and they're all going to hit on a 5 or 6. And in this case, the Allies have 2 hits. Japanese have none. So they're going to take an additional 2 hits. And we analyze this, and 2nd Division has 3. The Australian and New Zealand forces have none. So nothing will happen. There's no damage to the attacker ever. But in this case, they wanted to damage those ground forces and take out that air, and they didn't do it. So this was definitely an Allied, you could say, victory. So we'll replace these forces on the board. The last combat resolution is going to be our resupply of the damaged 43rd Division at Guadalcanal. We'll lay this out on the board. And now we're going to resolve our combat situation, and I think the U.S. is going to risk one of its tactical subs and attack the carrier task force with that. Japanese will roll for anti-submarine warfare. They have 1 destroyer, and they're going to gain a +1 for that due to friendly land-based air unit or carrier unit in the hex. So that's what they'll do. They'll get a +1. So here is the Japanese ASW roll. The roll is a 2, and that's modified to a 3. They failed to detect the tactical sub. It is going to target the Hiru, and it's going to roll 1d6. Now, once again, the U.S. submarine attack on task forces during turns 2 to 5 has a -1 attached to it, so they have to basically roll a 6 to strike the carrier, and here is the roll. They rolled a 5, and that was close. So the Hiru just about took a torpedo hit. That'll move the U.S. sub forces down to 0. They will have used all of their sub points, and now one of the destroyers will move into the sea control box, landing the replacements, which are going to reconstitute the 43rd Division. And now we're going to resolve our ground combat. I failed to do the air points, though. I forgot about that. The Hiryu has 3 air points. The U.S. has none. So they will probably use those 3 air points in a ground support role. And Guadalcanal it's a Japanese controlled, so the U.S. forces get no anti-aircraft. So Japan will be rolling 3 dice. They have air supremacy, no Allied air points, and they'll be gaining a +1. So here is the roll. And they had a total of 1 hit. That'll do 1 point of damage to the 1st Marine Division. Japanese forces are supplied, U.S. Marines are not. Each side will roll 4 dice. Japanese will be hitting on a 5 or 6, and the Americans on a 6 only. Here is the roll. Wow. U.S. did 2 hits. Japanese did 2 hits. So we'll mark that accordingly. So 2 additional hits are placed on the U.S. Marines and 2 hits on the 43rd Division. They have a greater amount of hits than the 43rd. The 1st Marine is inverted and spent. And that is the conclusion of our combat during the turn. And that's going to complete our combat phase, and now we'll move to our return to base phase. All the Japanese units will return to Kure. Alright, so all of the Japanese units have returned to Kure, and we'll move on now to the second deployment phase. Now Japan has a total of 4 transport points remaining, and I think what they would do is, anticipating a U.S. resupply effort into Guadalcanal, they already have some carrier forces available here, and I think they'll use those 4 points to try to build up a surface fleet of some kind. So I think what they'll do is take a cruiser and 2 destroyers, and those will move from Kure to Truk. 4 movement points, and that will spend all of the Japanese transport points, so they won't have any available for oil transfer. But this is a critical time, so I think that's what they will do. All of the committed aircraft would go back to their own bases, and that is going to bring that phase to a close. And then now we're going to go to our end phase, and we're going to add up all of the Japanese victory points that we've garnered. Japan has taken Rangoon. That's going to earn them 1 victory point, moving us up to 31. General Yamashita's 25th Army has taken Singapore, and that's going to earn 3 victory points, moving us up to 34. Kawaguchi Brigade has taken Leyte, and that is going to move us up 1. We're up to 35 victory points. The Achiki Brigade has landed in Hollandia, and they will take control of that for 1 victory point, moving us up to 36. And that's the extent of the Japanese victory points. We have contested control of Port Moresby, Guadalcanal, and Surabaya. The spunky Dutch have put up some fight in Surabaya. And that's going to bring the Japanese portion of the turn to a close, and we'll commence with the Allied segment. All right, now we're going to begin the Allied turn, and it is the Allied segment of the economic phase. Unfortunately, the U.S. spent both of their submarines that they had available on tactical issues, and they have none left for strategic. We'll move on to the Allied reinforcement phase. All right, U.S. reinforcements are placed in the West Coast box. They're going to get 2 air points, the 2nd Marine Division, the Wasp and Hornet, Pensacola-class cruiser, and 2 destroyers. British reinforcements include 2 air points, the Formidable and Indomitable aircraft carriers, the Ramillies and the Resolution battleships, along with the Revenge and Royal Sovereign, County-class cruiser, and 3 destroyers. Those are placed in the Indian Ocean ports box. And I think both sides are going to transfer these to their respective free transfer locations. British will move them into Bombay, and the U.S. will move them in their units into Pearl. U.S. subpoints are reset to 2, and they're going to gain a total of 32 transport points. The British will have their transport marker reset to 12. In addition, the U.S. is going to construct a 2-point replacement land unit in the West Coast, and that will also be moved by the free movement, the free transfer to Pearl. And they're going to have to try to get that to Guadalcanal to continue the battle with the 1st Marine Division against the 43rd Division. So we'll move on to the Allied first deployment phase. As it stands now, Japan has 36 victory points. So if the game ended right now, Japan would win Scenario 3. So the U.S. needs to retake 1 victory point somewhere. They probably won't be able to do it at Guadalcanal. Most they can do there is continue to contest that location. So we'll have to look for another location that we can hit. To me, it seems Wake Island is probably the most likely target. If that was to be taken, that will put us within 2 points of either the Gilberts or Marshalls. And that opens up the Marshalls to invasion. And then the Japanese would have to defend both of those locations. If we went for the Gilberts, that would only leave, well, I guess it would be the same, but this would, I think, be a more important location. Perhaps. We'll have to think about that a little bit. Well, the first thing we have to do is definitely get the replacement points down to Noumea so that they can make a landing at Guadalcanal to resupply the 1st Marine Division. So we'll set up a task force for that. So at Pearl, I think we'll set up 2 forces. We're going to have some units to transfer those replacement points. That'll be the Northampton and a destroyer and the 2-point replacement. So that will cost us 2, 4, 5 for each leg. So 1 leg to here, 1 leg to Noumea. That'll be a total of 10 transport points, moving us down to 22. Then we're going to have a carrier force go down there, and that will be the Lexington, Saratoga, and a destroyer. That's a total of 5. And 5 and 10 to transfer that unit down to Noumea there. And that's going to be a total of 12 transport points remaining. And I think that's all that the U.S. is going to do. They're going to save some of those transport points for a likely invasion of Wake Island. In the South Pacific, we're going to set up a landing force for the replacements. That'll be a Benham-class destroyer and a Northampton-class cruiser, and the replacement points. That'll cost us a total of 4 transport points, moving us down to 8, and that force will move into Guadalcanal. We'll also send in a carrier force consisting of the Lexington and Saratoga and a destroyer, and that will serve as a carrier support group there. And I think it's important enough where we're going to include the Perth as well. And that's going to move 1, 2, and 3, and that's a separate task force. We'll move that in. Then at Pearl Harbor, we're going to assemble a Wake Island invasion force. It's going to consist of the 4th Marine Division, 2 carriers, 3 destroyers, Atlanta-class anti-aircraft light cruiser, and a battleship. The Pennsylvania is going to come along. It'll provide some ground support, perhaps. The U.S. units don't have to pay for anything except for the Marine Division, and that's going to be a cost of 8 transport points. It'll leave them with 0. And that force is going to move into Wake Island. Now we'll have a carrier force and a support group. I guess we'll include the light cruiser with that. The rest of this will be an invasion force. So those are going to move into the Wake Island area. 1, 2, 3 movement points. And that will be the U.S. counterattack. If they're able to take Wake, it looks like there more than likely would be a draw unless there are some severe carrier losses. And now we have to worry about the British Far East forces. They have a total of 12 transport points. Now they have no ground forces available other than the 23rd Division. And we'll have to see what we want to do with that. I accidentally put a Australian air unit there, and that should be a British one. We'll do it that way. I think the British are going to move 8 points of naval units. That's a carrier, heavy cruiser, and 2 destroyers, and we'll move those down to Ceylon. That has a capacity of 16, and I think they could better intercept from that location. Now the air points, there's not much the British can do with that. Unfortunately, the air capacity of Calcutta is only 2, which is kind of surprising to me, but that's what it is. So we'll have to leave the air units as we have them. There's really no other place for us to transfer them to until we would retake a base like Rangoon or something. Now the British Indian Army has to decide, are they going to stay in Calcutta or did they move in and occupy Burma? This is a tough one because Burma can easily become a meat grinder. You can't place any air units in Burma, but air units can be added during the air commitment phase of the friendly phase from either Rangoon and Bangkok or from Calcutta. Now the British are somewhat at a disadvantage. They can only bring 2 air points against Burma, where the Japanese can get 4, technically 8 air points into there. And if you add in those from Hainan, I think you can cross a no crossing barrier with air units, of course, so you could bring in 12. I mean, so it's could be a meat grinder there. I'm not sure if General Wavell would move his force into Burma or not. Well, if the Japanese get air units into Rangoon, it's going to cut off Calcutta from receiving any replacement points. They would have to send, well, they could send them through the Gangetic Plain. I guess that's possible because when you're within one space, you can use those replacement points within 1 hex of the depleted army. So I guess that wouldn't be a problem for them. They can be supplied through that. So I guess if that's the case, we'll make a roll on the Oracle table and we'll see if General Wavell moves his Indian Army into Burma. I think I'd rate this as a 50-50, so we'll see what happens. The question is does Wavell move the Indian Army into Burma? Here's the roll. Roll is a 5, and that is no, but. All right, well, that would be no, but a portion of the plan or idea might be authorized. Well, we can't bring any more ground forces into Calcutta, so we can't move the 23rd Division into there and use a smaller force. That might be authorized. So I guess we'll just accept the no and leave it at that. And the only other consideration is the British have now a total of, we spent 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That'll leave them with 4 transport points, and I guess we can use that for, well, reactions we don't have to pay for, so we don't have to preserve any of that. I guess if that's the case, we'll move the battleship and a destroyer. Well, a battleship. We'll move a battleship into Ceylon. That'll be all of our transport points for the British. We'll do that. So the only operational units we could use for the British would be to create a task force in Ceylon and then to move that carrier task force into Surabaya to try to support the Dutch, and we'd be able to provide some air cover for them, and we'd be able to cut off the Japanese 38th Division by taking sea control So maybe that might be worthwhile. So I think we will do that. We'll form a task force in Ceylon. And we need to have a movement value of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 points. And that would be everything, including the battleship, could go if we chose to. But I think we'll just use a carrier and a destroyer. And we'll activate those forces, the Formidable and the Indomitable, and a G-class destroyer. Those will be activated, and we'll move them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 into Surabaya. And they can help providing air cover and to control the seas in that area. Japanese have no forces that they can respond with, so maybe we'll include the battleship too. And we'll keep a cruiser and destroyer for response. So that'll be the force that we're going to move then to Surabaya. I did it a bit out of sequence, but these are our moves for the Americans in Guadalcanal. That consists of a carrier group, the Lexington Saratoga with a destroyer. The Perth is an independent light cruiser, and then we've got the replacement squadron based with a destroyer and a heavy cruiser. Our Wake Island invasion force consists of a carrier group, the Wasp and Hornet, Yorktown Enterprise, destroyer, and the anti-aircraft light cruiser Atlanta. That'll provide the air cover. And the invasion force will be the 2nd Marine Division under Marston with the Pennsylvania and Arizona, a Benson-class destroyer, and another Benson-class destroyer. That'll be the invasion force. We'll see what happens with that. And now we'll move on to the Japanese reaction phase. And the Americans have put the Japanese a bit on the horns of a dilemma. They need to respond into 2 areas. Given the victory point system, we don't want to lose Wake Island, because if we lose that, it'll be likely a draw or worse. So Japan's going to have to decide how they will respond to this. They can split their forces or send a group to one or the other. There's no response to Surabaya. We have no forces within reaction range. So that's kind of a done deal. So we'll see what happens with this. We'll see what the Japanese will do in response. Possible response force would consist of the Kaga and Akagi, Shokaku Zuikaku, a heavy cruiser, and 3 destroyers. That's what would be available for us. We have a total of 13 oil. So 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. It's just enough to move that force. If we choose to move the entire force, there's enough oil for that. And I'm going to think about this. And I think Admiral Nagumo is going to take command of this force, spending all remaining oil points, 13 oil. And he is going to sail to confront the Americans at Wake Island. Be a large battle there. All right, I'm going to start resolving these, beginning with the west and moving east. And we'll begin with the combined Dutch and British force in Surabaya. All right, the Japanese have 1 subpoint remaining, but they're probably going to be saving that for the Wake Island battle. So we will see what we have here in our battle board preparation. British have an aircraft carrier with 2 air points, battleship Ramillies Resolution, G-class destroyer, and the Dutch Defense Force. Japan has no air points, only the 38th Division. There's no air-to-air combat, so the British have air supremacy. And they're going to apply both of their aircraft to ground attack on the 38th Division. There's no anti-aircraft, so we'll be rolling for the British ground attack on the 38th. They're going to get a +1 air supremacy with the aircraft included, so +1 to these rolls. Ended up with 2 hits. So we will mark the 38th Division with 2 hits. Aircraft will fly back to the carrier. And now the G-class destroyers will rest sea control, and the Ramillies and Resolution are going to fire in ground support on the 38th Division. So they'll be rolling 2 dice, and there's no modifiers for this. And they ended up with no hits. So now we're going to go to our ground resolution. The Dutch have supply. Japanese do not. So the Dutch will be rolling 4 dice and hitting on a 5 or 6. They have no hits. It's amazing. Japanese will counterattack. They will only hit on 6s. They have 1 hit. So the Dutch ended up winning the battle 2-1. Japanese 38th Division is inverted. All right. And now we'll move on to the combat resolution in Port Moresby. The New Zealand and Australian brigades are supported by an air point, giving the Commonwealth forces 1 air point and giving them air supremacy. They're going to launch 1 ground attack on the 2nd Division. This will be at +1. 4 becomes a 5, and that is a point of damage on the 2nd Division. Now we'll get to the ground combat aspects. The 30th Australian and 8th New Zealand will roll, and they are going to be supplied, and the Japanese will also be supplied. So here is the roll. They have no hits. No hits for the Commonwealth forces. Here's the Japanese. They have no hits. They ended up losing 1-0. That's going to spend the 2nd Division. Oh boy. And now it's going to be the American resupply effort of the 1st Marine Division on Guadalcanal. The United States has the Lexington and Saratoga. That's going to give them 4 air points. Japanese have none. Invasion force consists of the Perth, Northampton, and the Benham, and the 2 replacement points. Japan has a limited anti-aircraft ability of 1, so they'll do their anti-aircraft roll. And that is a miss. So the U.S. will have 4 air points that they can spend in ground support, and that's what they're going to do. 4 ground support. That gives them air supremacy. Japan has no air points, so these will all be at +1. 4 dice at +1. And they ended up with only 1 hit, so 1 hit is done to the 43rd Division. The destroyer will take sea control, landing the replacements on Guadalcanal and reconstituting the 1st Marine Division. Now we're going to conduct our offshore bombardment. We've got the 1 point for the Perth and 1 point for the Northampton. 2 dice will be rolled. They have 1 hit. Another hit applied to the 43rd. U.S. Marine Division is in supply. The 43rd Division is out of supply. So the Marines will be hitting on a 5 and 6. Here's the roll. And Marines have 1 hit. Japanese have none. So the 43rd Division loses 3-0, and that's going to invert it. All right. And now it's going to be the U.S. counterattack in the Central Pacific. The 2nd Marine Division is going to attempt to land on Wake Island. Admiral Nagumo's carrier force has come to intercept. All right, each side has 2 different task forces. We've got a carrier task force for the United States, Yorktown Enterprise, Wasp Hornet, a destroyer, and a light cruiser anti-aircraft, the Atlanta. Invasion force consists of a battleship, 2 destroyers, and the 2nd Marine Division. It's going to give the U.S. a total of 8 air points. Japan is the forces defending with the Special Naval Landing Force, 2 points of land-based aircraft, a surface fleet consisting of, these should be flipped over, consisting of a heavy cruiser and 2 destroyers, and the carrier force, Akagi Kaga, Shokaku Zuikaku, and a destroyer. The U.S. is going to commit both of its submarines. One is going to commit to attacking the Myoko. One will go after Akagi. Japan is going to use its last tactical sub, and it will go after the Wasp and Hornet. So we'll make our anti-sub rolls. Japan, on this first attack, has a total of 2 anti-sub forces there, so they'll roll 2 dice and see if we can get a 5 or 6 to stop the tactical sub. They failed. So the U.S. tactical sub is going to target the Myoko, and it's going to fire at a -1. Yeah, so it needs a 6 to hit. And it missed. So that sub was unsuccessful, but it did have a firing solution. Now it will target the Akagi and Kaga. Japan has 1 destroyer defending the force. Here's the ASW roll. They were unsuccessful. So U.S. sub is going to get a firing solution against the Akagi. Here's the roll. The roll is a 6, so they have hit, torpedo hit on the Akagi. Oh my goodness. Wow. All right, we're going to do the damage resolution for that. So the following modifiers will apply, and it's going to be +2 for a sub-attack hit. All right, so they're going to gain a +2 to this. They're going to roll 2 dice, +2, and they're going to attempt to equal or exceed a 9 to sink Akagi and Kaga. Oh my goodness, here's the roll. The roll is an 11, that's modified to a 13, and the Akagi has been sunk. Oh my goodness. That means that the Japanese air power is going to be reduced by 4 points down to 6. Oh my goodness, those subs. Now Japan is going to use their sub forces. The United States has 1 destroyer protecting that group, and it's going to gain a +1 for carrier aircraft in the area, so they'll be adding 1 to the roll. Here is the roll. 3 + 1 is 4. That's insufficient, so the Japanese will target the Wasp and Hornet. Here's Japan's sub-attack on the Wasp and Hornet. No modifiers. Rolls a 2, and they've missed. All right, so that ends our sub phase, and we're going to move on now to the airstrikes and air combat phase. U.S. has a total of 8 air points. Japan has a total of 6. Here's the American air attack. And they ended up with 1 hit. So that is going to reduce the Japanese air power by 1 down to 5. But Japan is going to shoot back with 6. And we'll see what they get. Now the pilots that we've got are not, unfortunately those were elite pilots that were sunk on the Kaga and Akagi. So all we have is the standard pilots from the Shokaku and Zuikaku. So 6 dice will be rolled. There will be no modifiers. And we'll see what the Japanese air power can do. And they did real well. They have a total of 4 hits. That'll reduce the American air power by 4. Down to 4. Japan is going to gain air superiority in the coming battle. And now we'll move on to our airstrikes. U.S. has 4 aircraft. Japan has 5. The team without air superiority has to assign their strikes first. So, well, that's a good, tough decision here. I guess they're going to assign 1 point to the cruiser and 3 strikes on the Japanese carrier. Japan now has to decide if they want to go after that 2nd Marine Division on transports or apply to the different carriers. We'd need to get 2 or more hits on that Marine Division in order to get an actual damage against it. So, let's see here. If we can damage that 2nd Marine Division, it won't be able to land. So I think what we'll do is we'll apply 3 air points going after those transports, and the other 2 will focus 1 on each. Well, first we have to do anti-aircraft before we do this, that's true. So let's take care of that first. No, I was right the first time. The anti-aircraft is done after we assign our targets. All right. We'll begin with the American strikes. This aircraft is going to have to undergo 2 points of anti-aircraft. So the Japanese will roll 2 dice. You have no hits. So that aircraft is going to attack the Myoko. There are no dice roll modifiers, so here is the attack. That is a hit. Successfully hit the cruiser. Now we've got 3 attacks on that carrier force. The carrier force has 1.5 points of anti-aircraft, so only 1 die. Here is the roll. He missed. So 3 American aircraft are going after the Shokaku Zuikaku. There are no modifiers for this. Here's the roll. He ended up with 2 hits. Oh my goodness. Still midway here. All right, and these aircraft will fly back. Now the Japanese will attack. The anti-aircraft ability of this task force is 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. So the Americans will roll 4 dice in anti-aircraft. Here's the roll. And they ended up getting 3 hits. 3 hits from American anti-aircraft. It'll take all those planes down that were going after the landing force. Wow. And our next group is a total anti-aircraft of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. U.S. anti-aircraft is awesome. Here's the U.S. anti-aircraft. And they've got plenty of hits. They've got 4 of them. That's enough to take all those aircraft out. So no strikes against the U.S. So we have an American hit on the Myoko. So we're going to roll 2 dice. And the following modifiers will apply. +1 airstrike hit. And that is all that they'll get. So it'll be 2 dice +1. It needs to get a 9 or greater to sink it. 7 + 1 is 8. It's not enough, so the Myoko is damaged, and that's going to go on the turn track 2 turns in advance. And that's going to come in on turn 5. Now we've got 2 airstrikes against the Shokaku and Zuikaku. They'll be gaining +1 for the first and +2 for the second. Here's the roll. We're looking to get a total of 9 or greater. They did it. An 11 +1 is 12, and that's enough to sink the Shokaku and Zuikaku. Amazing. Japanese air power has been destroyed. Wow. All right, that finishes the air segment. We'll move on now to the surface actions. We had air superiority, so that still maintains. U.S. forces are in, and we can target as we wish now. So, we're not going to have much of a chance against the Pennsylvania, so I guess they will just target those destroyers, and they'll use their long-lance torpedoes during the first round. We'll start with the Japanese. Both of them will have a firepower of 2 because of the long-lance torpedoes. So the attacks will be a firepower of 2 against an 8 defense. That'll give a target value of 3 or greater. Okay, this will be the attack on that first Benson for the Japanese. A 2. That's not enough. Next one, same thing, a 3 or greater they need. And they missed on both accounts, my goodness. Now the U.S. is going to fire, and since there's a lack of those, they can double up on who they want. So, first Benson will fire on the Japanese destroyer. That is a value of 0, attacking an 8. They're looking for a 5 there, 5 or greater. That's a miss. Then you've got the Pennsylvania. That's a firepower of 2 against an 8 is a 3 or greater. That's a miss. And then finally that last Benson will fire. They're looking for a firepower of 0 against an 8 is a 5 or greater. That's a hit. They managed to get a hit there. All right, we'll see about the damage then on that Japanese destroyer. And it's going to be no modifiers. So they're looking for a roll of, there's no gunnery value, so they're looking for an 8 or greater to sink it. Here is the roll. They didn't do it, so that is going to be damaged. It will appear 2 turns in advance. And now we would move on to the second round. And it's not looking good for Japan. I guess Japan will stick around, and they're going to target a destroyer. And the U.S. will have all of its other forces targeting that same unit. Somewhat of a suicide mission, but if they withdraw, all of those units would fire at them. So the odds on them surviving that would be slim anyway. So we'll have the Japanese attacking a Armor 8 Benson destroyer. So 0 firepower, and an 8 defense produces a 5 or greater. Here's the Japanese roll. And they have a hit. So they managed to hit that. Now all the other forces are going to attack the Japanese destroyer. We'll start with the Pennsylvania. A 2 firepower versus an 8. It needs a 3 or greater to hit. And they did it. So that is a hit on the Japanese destroyer. That first Benson will fire, and that needs a 5 or greater. It's a miss. And then this last destroyer will fire. And that's a miss. So we'll calculate the damage now. The first one is, we'll take care of the one on the Benson. And it's a straight up roll. There's no advantage for anyone. And need an 8 or greater to sink it. They did not, so the Benson will be damaged and it will appear 2 turns in advance. And now the combat against, or the damage against that destroyer, and I believe that was that the Pennsylvania? I'm going to have to look to see who did the damage. Yeah, that was the Pennsylvania that struck it, so it's going to gain a +2 modifier. So here's the roll. They're looking for a 8 or greater with a +2. They only rolled a 3, amazingly. So the unit survives, and it'll come back as a damaged force on turn 5. And the U.S. has sea control, and the 2nd Marines are going to come ashore. It's amazing. U.S. has sea control, Japanese do not. Now the problem is I should have targeted that land-based aircraft with the U.S. forces, but they ended up sinking those carriers. So I guess what will happen now is 2 points of damage automatically are going to go on the 2nd Marine Division for the existing land-based air. And now we'll make our rolls. The Marine Division is fighting alone on a beach, so it gets +1, and it will be hitting now on a 4, 5, or 6. Here is the roll. They scored a total of 2 hits. 2 hits are applied to the Japanese Special Naval Landing Force. Now the SNLF will fire 2 dice, and they're only going to hit on 6s. They have no hits. So we have 2 points of damage on each side. And that's equal, and therefore nothing happens. So both forces are now going to be on Wake Island, but the Japanese will still control it. So those forces return to the map. We've got a fully functioning brigade and division on Wake Island and the remnants of the Japanese fleet. So we're going to move on now to the return to base phase. So all activated units will return to their bases, and then the U.S. has a second deployment opportunity. So all of the forces have returned, and we'll move to the second deployment phase. The U.S. and the British have no transport points remaining, so there won't be any second deployments. We'll move on to the end phase, and no bases have changed any hands. They're all contested where they are. So in that case, we'll have to do our victory point calculations. As it stands now, Japan has 36 victory points, but 2 Japanese carriers were sunk, an elite carrier and a non-elite carrier. The elite carrier's loss will cause a loss of 2 victory points and 1 for the standard carrier, moving us down to 33, and that's going to be an Allied victory. So that's going to bring this playthrough to a close, and I apologize for changing the format. I really intended to bring this as the Scenario 2, the complete game, but I didn't realize it would take me this long to film it, and another additional 13 turns would be just too much. So we're going to abbreviate it with the results that we have. It's a U.S. victory by points, and Japan did a good job on occupying the locations, but the disaster at Wake Island was just terrible, losing 4 fleet carriers and especially the pride of the Japanese fleet, the Akagi. But that's what happened. So I hope you enjoyed this playthrough of Fire in the Sky, and I hope to see you again soon at the Solo Gamers Club. In the meantime, have a nice evening. Good night.